everybody. I am here with Dr. Patrick Stinson. Patrick, thanks for being here. Why don't you tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, thank you. This is my second podcast, so I'm not sure if I have a podcast voice or whatever, or frame of mind. We'll find out. Let's see. Okay, I'm Patrick Stinson, and I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I was born in Anchorage, Alaska, and I am a software engineer. Um, and I got a PsyD, have a doctor of clinical psychology in somewhere in the middle of my software career, which is probably kind of weird. It feels kind of weird to me sometimes, but I think I'm fundamentally an engineer type, and I like building things and solving problems. I like puzzles and stuff like that, and I really liked getting into um, how people work, and particularly how groups work, and particularly how threat moves through groups. Turns out, which lands you straight into the middle of family systems theory, Bowen
Mhm.
theory, and I originally thought when I was going to grad school that I was going to be a clinical psychologist, and a big part of that was that there wasn't the being a software engineer in Anchorage wasn't as lucrative as the rest of the world, and then when COVID happened, that all changed. Now you can do fairly well remote, and so that shifted things quite a bit, but I'm glad it did because once I got finished grad school, I started working in the tech field again, and allowed me to keep a certain distance from psychology, and allowed me to pick up my projects. And I think my psychological research and development projects in a much more precise way, with a different way of thinking about it. And I have a lot of fun doing that on the side, and hopefully that'll be a stream of income at some point, maybe as my day jobs start day job, let's see here, starts winding down, and then how do I get these to cross? Um, and within 10 years or something like that, I can be shifting over to what I would like to do all the time. But maybe when I'm closer to retirement, I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, so that's what I'm doing, and I'm married. I have no kids. Spent some time at the Bowen Center in an internship. Yeah, there's a lot of, not sure what else to talk about, but that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, yeah. And you're going fishing later.
Going fishing later. Yep, just south of Anchorage.
I hear you. So, Patrick, as you stepped back, you got your PsyD in clinical psychology, and you said you stepped back from it. You started doing the engineering thing. As you step back, what do you see in the field? What are some trends you notice in the field of psychology or therapy, psychotherapy?
Nice, open-ended question. They taught you this in interview school. That's good. All right. So, uh, yeah. Well, I think I know where I'm going with this. Just trying to figure out where to start. Like I said, I am fundamentally an engineer, and my brain works that way. And it took me a lot of grad school to figure that out. I was figuring that out in grad school, um, which how my brain really worked and how my mind really worked,
Hmm.
and so grad school was hard for me in a way because I was always looking for ways to I was always looking for ways to systematize and organize what we were doing, um, ways to make things predictable and more organized, and I mean I'm a creative guy as well. I'm not just a black and white robot over here, but um, but I was that's what I like to do. I like to build things. I'm a systematic
Mhm.
thinker, and I love doing that. I like taking really complicated things and just making them all click in order, and that's why I'm a software engineer.
Yeah.
And
Let me,
yeah,
before you keep going, I wanted to let everybody know that even though I want to reiterate that even though you are an engineer, Patrick's an incredibly creative guy. Uh, you like to build things, like you said, you're a creator. And I think you're an artist, man. You just in the dress of an engineer, you know. So anyway, keep going. So you
Well,
were learning how your brain works and figuring that out.
yeah. Jung said we needed to develop all parts of ourselves, you know. So that's good to hear what you said. So I was looking at what was going on, you know, the way people were thinking and talking and researching and learning the field of clinical psychology, um, which professionally is practically, for all practical purposes, identical to all the other therapeutic, licensable therapeutic professions. And um, I just was kind of flabbergasted at how disorganized it felt. And I say felt because I'm laying that down as an opinion, especially at that point. And so my dissertation, getting into your question, my dissertation was about, um, it was a huge theoretical dissertation. It was very, very long, which means that it really covered a lot of topics. But at the very core of it, I was trying to find solid ground, some kind, technically speaking, paradigmatic, theoretical grounding, some way to organize what I understood about how people work, because that's all that matters. And I believe, whether a person realizes this or not, that is what matters about what you do when you work with people. And when I'm talking to you, I have a model I'm working from. And I just couldn't find that in my program. And, I was in the Bay Area. So it's as progressive as it gets. People are trying new things about as fast
Mm.
as you possibly can in the world. But that means that there's a lot more chaos. And it was very, I didn't, I wanted I wanted some kind of a grounding so that I could do all the fun exploration stuff. And I left, so my dissertation was about that. And what is the status of the field in terms of its scientific validity? The big theories that are out there that people use, like what exactly is solid
Mm.
and available, and how did people think about that? And I realized that the field is, and I'm going to just go out on a limb there for any people who's watching this. You can disagree with this, but I think technically speaking, the field of clinical psychology, the field of psychotherapy, which is all of the, LPCs, LCSWs, etc., clinical psychologists, is a mess. And I mean that technically in the sense that we are still debating what paradigm the field is in. And currently, the answer is, well, it's eclectic. And that literally means that there isn't like a grounded starting point that's like, well, what are we even doing here? That's what it means. That's what a paradigm is when we all at least know what we're doing here. you know? So you asked me what did I think about the field when I left or something like that. I thought, yeah, that's pretty wild. And then at the time I was thinking, yeah, well, and I really like building things, and I remember that. And I'm a modernist engineer, and I like taking hard problems and making sense of them. And so,
Yeah.
anyway, you can go a number of ways from that, but
Yeah. So you saw the field was kind of eclectic, a little loosey goosey. There was no central paradigm that everybody could agree upon, start from. Uh, it only took you 900 pages to figure that out, by the way.
yeah,
I saw your dissertation,
yeah, that's a
which,
proper theoretical thesis. It's quite
yeah,
long.
it was
That's right.
fantastic. You had a lot of good stuff in there. I read
Yeah.
most of it, not all of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry. I thought only
yeah.
the people on my committee were had to suffer through that.
No,
Yeah.
I like suffering. I had to go.
And it's not a problem that it's eclectic. Well, it is a problem that it's eclectic. It's not like, it makes sense because I think it's indicative of how much we actually know about how people work, and it doesn't matter which one you choose. But if you're going to
Mm,
be a field, that means you literally have a paradigm. And I just don't
yeah.
think that that's quite as true as many people would think when you compare what professionals actually do to what their licensing boards would say they do.
Mm. That people operate even perhaps more eclectically, more
Quite.
than the
Yeah,
standards of whatever their licensure would be.
that's right.
Yeah.
I guess that's the way it is.
So, what would be the a different way to think about um, the field uh, of how do we find the paradigm?
Well, um, if you lay them out from my perspective, and then we have to be owning perspectives because that's when you don't have a paradigm, that's what that means.
Hmm.
The way that I think about things, there's I think about them on a spectrum from strictly scientific, modernist, if you will. Even these terms are kind of fuzzy, but I'm a scientific engineer guy to all the way out into the far depths of reaches of postmodernist. There's nothing is real type of thing. Nothing is
So, you
is
got the
it's
modernism, postmodernism
sure. I mean, that's a
ends of
good
the
way to frame
spectrum.
it, and you can see I'm
Yeah.
starting to frame our conversation in a paradigm a little bit. But
Yeah.
the problem is that the question that you asked demands a structure. And when you go from the scientific edge out into the other ones, the structure goes away, and even the far ones reject any structure. And
Mm.
so I just speak from the one that I live in, which is that I'm in
Yeah.
research and development in STEM, you know?
Yeah.
And that just makes I don't know, it makes life easier for me, and that's and I think that if you want the most structure, that's where you find it.
Yeah.
Maybe
So,
you don't.
what? Well, maybe some people don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
know a lot of people
so
that don't.
what? Yeah. So, what did you find in talking about your perspective? What did you find in terms of psychotherapy that's resonated with you? A
Oh
way of
yeah.
thinking.
Well, that's a good question because it's kind of like what's of value, instead of me just saying everything's a mess, because that's not the whole story. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you that with some of my earlier, like historically earlier heroes, Jung is definitely a major hero of mine, and he's golly, I mean, he's not an engineer, but he was a biological essentialist, which means he was into science and he was into trying to find things that were he was trying to find things that were about how people worked that were solid and reliable. You know, he tried to make predictions from people's dreams and claimed to have known that World War II was coming. All these are untestable, but golly, I mean, there's so much from him. I mean, Freud was incredible, an incredible genius. I'm just talking about people, but the reason that I'm naming people like Freud and Jung and Bowen. I mean, Bowen's a big one. There's a number of others. Is because of the theoretical basis that they held. It's
Mm,
because of the ideas that the structure that they added um, to the field that help us understand how people work. And
mm,
because it's a hard field because we know so little. We're able to predict so little and test and measure so little. And so people, it's chaotic just because of that. And so anyway, I thought that so coming from that, coming from from a theoretical perspective, like how do I think people work and what do I think really helps and was interesting is that it seemed the talk therapy idea was genius, and it's got a lot of problems. It's not a perfect thing, but there's something about the interaction between a professional and a client that is
mm,
absolutely legitimate. But at the same time, I don't think that's the end of the story. I think in mainstream clinical training, that is the end of the story, more or less. And I think that's actually written and codified in plenty of places, but even ethically, it's written in there. But it it demonstrates the importance of relationships and that humans, I'm thinking biologically, evolutionarily, humans have this. kind of wildly interconnected stuff going on between each other. And my opinion, because we haven't demonstrated much of this yet, is that when a professional talks to a human, that has some kind of impact and power. We don't understand it yet, but that's indicative of deeper familial, for example, more genetically similar relationships that are much more that have the same thing going on at way more intensity,
Hmm.
that impacts symptoms and things like that. But I mean, there's something about that and understanding, when you go back to Jung, understanding how the impressions that people have about what's going on around them that is almost completely emotionally driven, actually, or instinctually driven, have patterns that are
Hmm.
instinctual and are adaptive, and we don't understand much about those, but that animals have them too, and they manifest differently. Um, and that's on one hand, while on the other hand, we have this amazing ability to think and systematize and put together models that can predict things far way further in the future than you can otherwise. I don't know. It's a giant. There's all kinds of cool stuff in there, and
Yeah.
we have no idea why we have mental and behavioral problems, um, and whether or not they are even problems. That's just a wild area to wonder about how things work. So I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I still do.
Yeah. It is. It's fascinating. Fascinates me. It sounds like you really appreciated the people, you met Freud and Jung, that were making like a real effort to under, understand how that functioned on a base, how people function on a basic level, and doing it in some kind of scientific way. Yeah.
Yeah, because the field doesn't have very much structure,
Yeah.
really. And when you have a correct structure, it allows you to do so much more exploration into the unknown. The reason that you and I can do this and the proliferation of ideas are happening is because of an insane amount of technology and paradigmatic coherence that just, wow, we're talking on here, and then you'll put it on the internet, and then boom, a million people can look at it. Hopefully they will. Um, yeah, anyway, you can scale and do so much more in problems that are very hard and complicated,
Mm.
and wondrous, if if you want to get into poetic language, when you've got some structure. And so I think that those ideas proliferated, and they will be around a lot longer because of that than the ideas that are very exploratory, that are happening in the postmodern world right now, for example. I think that's not going to last as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. When you said explosive and fascinating, I was thinking of you were just talking about how intricate and subtle human behavior is, how tuned in and sensitive we are to each other. You talked about it in terms of therapy. That's what makes the therapeutic relationship work that we don't really understand. It's the power in it, and that happens on an interpersonal level in the family. That we're so wired together in some way that we affect each other in a basic way that plays out in how our lives get expressed. Um,
Eerie way. It's
Eerie
like
way.
uncanny, like, whoa. How did how did my wife know that? I hadn't even said it yet. Like, what is
Uh,
going on?
I forget who it was. I think one of our colleagues was telling a story one time where he came home and he was coming into the house from work, and he came in, he could feel the atmosphere. His wife looked upset, and he said, "Oh, honey, do you want to go to dinner?" And he's like, "Whose decision was it, hers or mine?"
Yeah. Yeah, Jung has this quote, and I can't remember where it was, and I think it's in the collected works, but I can't remember. He said, "You think your thoughts are your own?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
just wait till you
Uh,
start looking at your dreams. You've got a lot of thoughts that are not yours. Anyway.
That's true. So, in terms of how we affect each other and this idea of the power of relationships, um, would you say that's what, thinking about that, were you thinking about that when you came across Bowen theory
Hmm. Let's see here.
or family systems?
No, I was just trying to not feel as terrible.
Oh, in your life?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's like it was like my first serious girlfriend or something, and I had a therapist, an MFT, who was,
Oh.
you know, I would say pretty well aligned, not completely, but pretty well aligned with kind of orthodox Bowen theory, or a lot of Bowen's writings and things like that, and at least knew them well. And
Mm,
that's just one of those things that just clicked in. So there was that, but then in a later stage, it was when I was trying to make the decision to go to grad school. So I was more, it was more sophisticated kind of decision process, and I just remember. I don't remember how I did kind of the survey of the different ways of looking at, psychology, basically, psychiatry, and
mhm,
it just it was some combination that I still hadn't quite figured out yet between Jung and Bowen that seemed, and more so Bowen, it just seemed like it was something that I could explain to other people and I could make a profession out of.
mm.
You know, I will never be a guy who offers professional services in a way aren't me- that aren't measurable or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, it was pretty good. Yeah, yeah, he's great. Yeah, you have no idea why, but oh yeah, he's great. You should go see him. Like that didn't click to me, and I just thought
Yeah.
that this just again the kind of structure in the Bowen theory, and it's like, well, this is what I'm trying to do.
Gives you a paradigm framework.
Yeah, yeah, and a theory
Yeah.
paradigm is broader, and a theory is more specific. It depends on a paradigm, and you need a theory
Yeah.
to explain what you're doing.
Define theory.
Uh, Theory is I can't remember exactly what the prefix is. Theory, thesis, theology is basically knowledge. Um,
Hmm.
Theory is the conceptual model that you use to um, make predictions. I
Yeah.
think that's
It's a
fundamentally it.
predictive model, right? Yeah.
It's conceptual, which means concept. If it's conceptual, it means it's in your head. It's really tightly bound with the way you think about things. It's not the same thing as having built a physical model, which is kind of the next step. You take a theory, you take a hunch or something like that, and then you build a physical model to test it. And then you kind of like, theory didn't work. Okay, maybe I wasn't thinking about it right. And then you um, say, maybe it's like this. Maybe it's like, but this is like, oh, why do rocks fall and hit the ground? I'm trying to understand how that works, and why does the big rock and the small rock hit the ground at the same time when I drop them you have to come up with ways to predict all this stuff in physics, and where you have the concept gravity and that kind of thing. It's in a prototypical theory, it's hard to really tell anybody what you really think about why the rocks hit the ground. And then it's
Hmm.
hard to mathematically predict really, really big rocks, or rocks going really long distances, and have them just absolutely nail the target on the other side of the Earth, like a ballistic missile. That requires physical models and mathematical models. And so theory is the way you think about something in order to make a prediction. I mean, if you have to really narrow it down, I think that's what it means.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Oh,
we,
let me add to that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's my answer. But the reason it matters, and I alluded to this, is that um, and this is coming from my paradigm of science and engineering, of STEM. Okay,
Hmm.
people who don't like thinking that way don't have to really believe what I'm about to say, but everybody has a theory that they use in psychotherapy, whether they know it or not. Okay, and you can have an explicit theory or an implicit theory. An explicit theory means you've written it down. and uh, you can explain it, you can explicate it. It's out of your head. It's formal now, even if it's just prose, English language or something. And implicit theory means you explain what you're doing, but in the mechanics and plumbing of your nervous system, effect and endocrine system, and all this stuff, um, there is that the decisions for what you've said and how you presented and what you've thought about or felt and all of that stuff is coming from somewhere.
Mhm.
And the most of the field, I think most people behave. I'm making generalizations here. It's really dangerous, so I probably shouldn't do that. But I think, okay, I'll just own it, own my opinion. My opinion is that most psychotherapists actually operate on implicit theory, and it blew my mind open to go through the exercise of explaining the logic in the form of concepts and a theory of why I would do a particular thing or say a particular thing in practice to make the implicit theory explicit.
Mm.
I don't think many people, at least in all of my training until I got to DC, uh, I the paradigm, the effective paradigm is in training was over several sites is that what you do, the tricks that you do to manipulate the case, which is like intervention, clinical
Mhm.
intervention, therapy, is the theory. And that's not a theory. The theory is a conceptual model that makes you predict. And that just was blew my mind. So you asked that question and I gave you a lot more, but golly. I mean, if you stop and say, wow, why am I doing this? What's the reasoning and the logic behind it? But that gets you into the scientific paradigm, and I don't
Yeah.
think that I think many professionals and maybe most professionals are not in the scientific paradigm in that sense. We'll see.
Yeah. No, definitely in the implicit paradigm.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
more about intuition, more eclectic.
Yeah. Would you say Freud and Jung were operating on the scientific paradigm,
Yes.
working out their theory? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's what you say, there's what you do, there's what's explicit, and then there's what you do implicitly. And we're all very, very emotional and intuitive, so you can go down
Mm.
that rabbit hole, but
In general.
both of those guys were striving for the scientific paradigm, and stated as much. Jung was trying, Freud obviously was. Um, and it doesn't mean everything in his theory and his evolved theory was correct because you're learning, and that's part of science too. But he was striving for that, striving for objectivity, and then Jung, who strayed further off that path in reality, I think implicitly did that. He was trying to do it. He was trying very hard to understand the structure, in the end, to understand the structure of our subjectivity and find patterns in it and make a
Mm.
biological basis for it that was conciliant across species. And that is a scientific endeavor. And he didn't get
Yeah.
super far. He didn't make
Yeah.
predictions that you could test, but yeah, they were shooting for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're shooting for it. And when I met you,
Easier for
Patrick,
me because I write software and that grounds you.
it's a very structured.
Hmm.
Uh, I met you, Patrick, in the Bowen Theory conference, in Washington, D.C., when Ian Cousins was there. That was the first one I ever
That was
went
the
to.
one.
That was the one. And he was doing the collective behavior,
Ah,
um, which was fantastic.
oh.
Um,
I'm about to, I'm actually slated to do a tech talk with him at my employer, Micron, with
Fantastic.
this other guy. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. With this
No,
other
go,
guy
go.
who is a total, total engineer, and he's playing with AI swarms,
Uh,
agent swarms, and
yeah.
so he doesn't have the biological part. I have that part, but it's like so we're both supposed to talk to him, and hopefully it'll happen. But I'm a little starstruck with that guy, with Ian
Uh,
Cousin. He's incredible.
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I hope it gets to happen. Um, but anyway, I knew when I was talking to you then. First of all, we were the only two people under 55, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Let's just say that
I
was
was just
basically right. There might have been one or two. I don't remember, but I know where you're going. Yeah.
basically right. But it was great to. I had so much fun talking to you, and I was like, God, this guy's smart. I hope I sound okay. I had my own insecurities, but I knew you were going to do something. So tell me about kind of your effort to what you've extracted or found in Bowen theory. You're kind of developing your own model.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 It's the same. It's the same thread I was tugging on when I first decided to go, to take a detour from software engineering and go into psychology. Um, the whole time, I think I'm always looking to build something and own it and sell it, hopefully, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Uh, let's see here. Uh, I would say that the way that I think about, my paradigm is definitely the scientific and evolutionary biology paradigm, squarely.
Hmm.
The theoretical place that I live in that paradigm is basically Bowen theory, and I don't really think that I, in my own head, that I changed much from what I've read and see what I implicitly kind of understand to be what most people who are still into Bowen theory probably agree, or the
Yeah.
language and the concepts and that kind of stuff. So I there's nothing super new or interesting there, but what I found in going what I found in diving all the way into that theoretical frame was the limits of its scientific precision. And just like in grad school, I found the limits of the paradigmatics. And it was hard to even have a conversation in grad school because we didn't have a starting point, really. I didn't think in our classes and in our internships and things, practica. But I found my paradigm in grad school, and then I moved up a level, and I thought, okay, well, the Bowen theoretical frame is my frame. I like this frame. This is where I want to be. And so, going on down that path, I thought, well, what is exactly solid in this thing? Because if you read all of the seminal literature, which I had to do
Hmm.
several times in my dissertation, 3 times, let's say, in my dissertation, and all the people who are still very active, the top of the leadership hierarchy, and you have a complete population sample of what Bowen theory is as it exists today, it's actually very difficult to cut the wheat from the chaff in terms of its scientific validity, because the language appear the there's a cultural style that Bowen started in his writing and in his speaking that seems like is still very well alive, that is very declarative. It says, this is the way it is. And if you read Bowen's book or articles or whatever, that's the way he spoke and wrote. And so when you don't even have a paradigm and then you don't even have a theory and you're just like lost and trying to find your way as a professional, having anyone talk like that is very magnetic. It's like, oh, wow,
Hmm.
there's something here. And that's incredible. And so it took me a long time to get past that, to know enough so that that wasn't something I was taking for fact, and then also to sift through all of the terms, the vernacular, if that's the right word to say for this, the terms that
Hmm.
everybody used in the paradigm, which also have the same thing. It's like always talking about facts and predictions and hypotheses and all this stuff that makes you like, wow, this is really scientific. It took a lot of obsession and work to realize where the line is on how much of that is really real. And
Mm.
I can go down, take any piece of that now and pick it apart in detail so that your average STEM person would understand what I'm talking about. Any one of the concepts, whether it's a theory or a hypothesis or a prediction or whatever. And I realized that the state of the art I'm getting to my model, I guess, because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
backstory is really important.
No, it's essential. Yeah.
I realized that, so the answer for Bowen theory then is that the state of the art was set by Bowen. And, a lot of this is going to be my opinion. It's like, how do you test
Hmm.
this? I don't know. But the state of the art of Bowen theory is that Merv, the figure that established a way of communicating and a set of concepts, basically did all of the work that ended up becoming propagated up until now, till this very day, um, during his time at Menninger's and Nim. And then it was like 1967 when when he did his famous paper and presentation where he presented his own family. And I can't remember, but I think that was when the six concepts were together, and then the seventh and eighth concept, the societal emotional process, and whatever the last one would be in order of release happen, and then uh, but the bulk of the innovation was the ideas apparently appeared in his mind in Menninger's, and after World War II, and then by 1951 or whatever it was through 57 was when hardcore theoretical development happened by direct observation in like a ethological type of a setting, meaning you're watching people kind of like animals and trying to figure out what's going on
Hmm.
despite what they say what is going on that psych ward. All of that occurred in the I, I suppose you could say in the paradigm of the time, the standards for academic research at the time, which is that you come up with some ideas and you just write them down and send them out, and it's like a journal article.
Hmm.
And there's no formal testing of explicit predictive models, which is what I was talking like when you build a model as opposed to just have an idea and you test it mathematically or mechanically or whatever. None of that was there. And so Bowen would go and do this, groundbreaking observation, which is kind of like going to the zoo or going to the seashore and just watching and just writing what you see. Um, and that's probably actually appropriate when you haven't done anything formal yet, even a formal theory.
Hmm.
So it's very open-ended, but there's no formal prediction up to the standards that we now have, which means you need to collect data in a very systematic way, in a defined way, where you can hand the instructions off to other people and they can do the same thing, and your data will be compatible. It has to be quality in that sense. And then there's a formal way defined up front, not after the fact and not whenever you feel like it, for whatever case you're trying to predict, but you have a formal way that you're making predictions from that data. And that's the explicit model part.
Mm.
That is the standard for scientific publication that gets you into Science or Nature. That's like,
Yeah.
holy crap, we can predict cancer this much better now.
Yeah. And that's been
And
really hard to do in the field of family therapy in general and in Bowen theory.
impossible. It hasn't been done.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was never achieved. And I think it took me a lot of years and frankly a lot of money. And I say that like with a little bit not really emotion, but I'm like looking into the camera thinking, this is a big deal. That it takes that much time and obsession and money to cut the wheat from the chaff and say, wait a second, this family idea does not exist in its own compartment somewhere else that has different rules. There are some things that Bowen put in there that are very cool methodologically, but it will never leave the bubble unless it adheres to the same language that everybody else does in the world has, that the world of STEM has, that funding comes with, unless it meets a higher standard of precision. And that means you got to start collecting data systematically and really defining what you're predicting. So I haven't even told you what the model is, but that's the problem statement. Um,
Yeah.
because without the problem statement, the model doesn't hold as much weight. Because like we're saying, I don't think many people are very familiar with even the fact that that problem is there, not just in Bowen theory, but in the field in general. Whenever you have a broad theory like Jung's theory, for example, or um, so anyway, before I dive into the actual model part, did any of that make sense, or was
Oh, I
that
think it makes perfect. It's a perfect statement of the problem, of the gap, of what's lacking in the field, of the challenge of kind of bringing that precision to something that's conceptual, really.
yeah? There's a standard for publication for a reason, and statistics have a function, and that can get confusing sometimes when you read the literature. And so, so anyway, what I'm working on is a solution to that problem. I'm not saying I have a solution, but I'm working on that problem.
Hmm.
And the very first thing that you've got to do is define a data model. You got to say, how am I going to systematically collect data that is not just on a little piece of this broad set of family system theory ideas, not just on cutoff and not just on a triangle, but how do you capture as much of it as you can? And and how is it not going to do some really vague statistical social science not paradigm methodological prediction, which I don't need to define. That'd take too long. But there's a degree of fuzziness when you just take surveys and start doing predictions, basically, and I don't want to do that. So what it boils down to, the first thing is to get a data model. I'll explain that in a second. What the variables are and how it's organized. And then after you have that, you have to have, like I said, a formal way of making predictions from that model. So set aside the formal way of making predictions, because the first thing you've got to do is collect data and then even see if you can subjectively find patterns in there. So the
Mm,
data model is, uh, and I really don't think there's anything different in the way Bowen theory has been taught since the 60s in
yeah.
this. It's just a more precise way of putting it together. It's that underneath the fundamental presumption, hypothetical presumption under Bowen theory, is that the wide range of mental and behavioral problems that are shipped off to therapists and psychiatrists, but mostly therapists, are um, impacted first, or more than anything, let's say, by the threat response, the biological threat response, which has nervous and endocrine components and others,
Hmm.
or I don't know what other systems there'd be. I don't know. I'm not a physiologist, but those are two ways to think about it. And the way that I say that is that you've got chronic and acute anxiety. I don't like the anxiety term, but it's what we have because it's subjective in psychiatry. But you've got the response to what somebody thinks is a threat, a perceived threat. And that's a big claim, is that is the first thing that you want to think about and look for in everything in the
Mm,
DSM. I don't know how to deal with the personality stuff so far because I don't really understand them as much, the personality disorders.
yeah, yeah.
Um, because then you have to go multi-generational. But yeah, so okay, so that's one piece. That's a theoretical claim. Now I'm talking about a piece of a theory.
Hmm.
It's saying, okay, I'm making a prediction, saying like, okay, well, if the anxiety goes down, then maybe your problem goes down a little bit. It's really simple, and your problem, let's call that a clinical symptom. So those are the
Hmm.
first two variables are in this very fairly simple data model, which is A and S, anxiety and symptom. How jacked up or agitated is somebody, and and how does that change over time? It's a time series data model. So and then how does the ups and downs of A uh, match up with the ups and downs of S? of your
Yeah.
symptom.
Yeah, that there's a connection between the increase or decrease in anxiety and how the symptom, what the symptom is, how it's presenting, that type of thing, or
That's
whether it
right.
goes up or down.
Really simple. And the field, there's so much interest in the clinical field broadly across licenses in threat response. There's
Hmm.
huge literature about threat. I mean, it's good grief. It's a great variable. So that captures part of the psychological part, not just the physiological part, because you're talking about perceived anxiety. And generally, that's something people can kind of say. It's like, oh, it's indicative in what they're saying. So that's the core etiological pipeline. That's a good place to start, is that you've got those two. And that's hard to see. It's a training problem or challenge to be able to get good at telling the difference between the two and being able to even track those differently to test the hypothesis of whether there's a relationship. You could do a class
Mm.
on that because we're just not that good at it. People are not good at it until you try. So there's that. The other variable is going to be that when is the other presumption or claim is going to be that when the A is going up and down, that there's things going on between people at the same time, probably, or kind of but just before.
Hmm.
And that goes back to your question about me. Is there anything about that intertwined, things that got me into the field? And it's a theoretical claim. It's a hypothesis to test that when you have clinical symptoms, that people are responding to it probably with a degree of all the physiological and psychological markers of threat, and then that there's if you ask questions about how those fluctuate over time and look at when they were going up, because usually they cluster together when these
Hmm.
things are happening, they have like a flare up. Um, there's probably something going on in the relationship system around that person, the symptom bearing person, that immediately preceded that kind of flare up or is happening in conjunction. And you can make it more complicated, like, oh, I had a flare up in my quite physiological symptom, and then I was so uncomfortable that I yelled at my spouse or my mom or something, which is a relationship thing, and then it snowballs. But that's a simple way to put it. There's another variable, but that's a really simple way to put it, and that's a lot to take on and try to observe.
Yeah, yeah, that anxiety, that the symptom, anxiety, and relationships interact in some way
Or
and
just
impact each
correlate.
other, or correlate.
And then from there, you're like, oh, well, they're correlating, so maybe they impact. Yeah, but it's like just try to get the
Or
data
basic is correlating. Yeah,
first. Is there even, yeah,
yeah.
are they even overlapping? So that's a good start.
Mm, mm. And then what about the last one?
Well, the last one's harder. The last one is how well you do with it, let's say.
Mm.
And
How well you do with the
all of that,
symptom,
all of
anxiety,
the other
all of it.
three.
Yeah,
Um, I don't know.
like.
I think that in the literature, that one has been not articulated well enough because it has too many pieces, which means it's more of a factor than a variable. Variable means it's a
Mm.
singular thing. A factor means it's kind of just a bunch of stuff, and we just know it's a it's a vague idea. But um, that's F in the model. So now we have SARF. Um, F stands for functioning, which goes back to the Bowen literature.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, and the idea of these variables is not mine. That came from Laura Hovstad and Kathy Sheffield, and they put it in an article in Family Systems Journal, and I believe that that was 2018. But the original idea for that came from them, and then what I've been doing is operationalizing it into some, with putting names to the variables like that, explicitly saying it's a timeline thing and having a methodology for that, and then and there's a number of other things, but just continuing the idea because that was not my genius idea to put those together.
Yeah.
Um, so there's I have to lay that out there because it's a genius idea. But functioning is how well you do with it. It's like, okay, we can all be anxious, but some people sail through it better than others. Some people just are a bull in a china shop, and some people solve the problem.
Yeah.
And Bowen, I think, boiled that down to, like, if I really have to boil it down, which is I can't do very well, it's going to be something like when the older part of you, which is generating the anxiety, the anxious reaction, when that is jacked up and in the front seat, how well can you bring the newer human part of you online that can think further into the future, think more sophisticated way? How well can it override the impulse to do something simple and ham-fisted that might cause more problems and just make sure that it's optimal and get all that energy
Mm.
going to the right way? That's one part of it. And the other part is going to be how, and it's kind of the same thing in some senses, but it's how much is other people's feelings and thoughts and behaviors impacting or overriding your ability to do that. And that's basically
Mm.
a maturity variable, is the way he laid it down. It's like people who mature better or further are able to operate them both in balance correctly and optimally. The
Yeah.
automatic and the driven and the relationship part versus being individual or seeing further into the future in a more sophisticated way, something like that. And so it's
Mm.
hard. It's hard to describe. People have all these different parts of it, but that's F.
Yeah. I liked how you said that. That's the kind of the capacity to manage the automatic, and then the relationship part. What do you do in the relationships, and how do they impact you? What's going on with that?
Yeah.
It's a great,
R is
uh,
Bowen theory. R is unique to Bowen theory, I would say, because R subdivides into things that really only make sense if you start talking in terms of Bowen theory, I think.
yeah, yeah. So what are you doing with it?
Well, trying to have a better answer than F is really complicated, and there's a lot of parts, and I don't really know how to explain it because that's not a good data model. But where do you, this is the state of that theoretical frame. It's
Hmm.
not far off, and it's probably more precise than the state of the field actually, in terms of what people actually do once they have a license or are in private practice, and not just doing you know um, ER psych evals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is to try to get them more precise. And so the first thing that looks like is having trying to arrive at some kind of an agreement for when if you've got the same case in 10 people, you've got to have some definition for each one of those variables that people can agree on without talking about it. And that's called inter-rater reliability, and
Mm.
that's a important milestone in academic research to achieve in the social sciences and in psychology. At least subjectively, that if you and I code the same case in two different rooms, but watching a video or whatever, we would come to the same conclusion, at least about the data we would collect. Not
Hmm.
even the conclusion about what to do clinically. That's a bigger, harder problem. I don't know how many people realize that, but just what data would you collect to do this scientifically? So just trying to nail that down and get the data to be higher quality is the first thing. And then in tandem, I've I'm building uh, I'm building I guess three different apps that are required to attack that from the AI angle as well, which
Hmm.
is an iterative reliability problem with AI as well. It's kind of the same challenge, so that at the very least somebody can pick up the mobile phone and pay a fee or whatever, and then do an intake and have that data. Let's say with 80% accuracy or 75% accuracy, it can do an interview with them and get their family diagram laid out and get a timeline, and then a clinician can take that and maybe do some corrections, and it saves a ton of time. Or
Yeah.
maybe a transcript, and it can do that and save a ton of time.
Mm. I think it's awesome. and you're doing a great job with it. How important is the timeline?
Oh, it's everything.
What's
It's the
yeah, what's
backbone.
the yeah, what makes it
What is it?
significant? Yeah, no, not what is it. What
Okay.
makes it significant? How is it helpful to this to thinking this way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what is it could be a question too. But the so it's so if you were to take, I'm just going to make a claim here and say I've never done this, but I'm going to say that if like a prediction, if you took half the people that I work with at Micron, a
Hmm.
computer memory manufacturer company, um, memory and storage, and asked them to figure out a way, and I'm talking the engineers,
Hmm.
ask them to figure out a way to organize the information in a video of a psychotherapy intake. Let's say even the first three videos, the first three sessions of an average psychotherapy in session or case. It's organize the data. You'd have to give them some boundaries on like what you're organizing. So you kind of have to maybe give them some variables and stuff. And let's say you gave them the variables. Actually, that's fine. We've got these four variables. You give them the explanation I just gave you, or the white paper I put together that's like 2 pages,
Hmm.
and say, here's the variables. How do you organize this? I bet 90% of them would draw them out on a timeline
Mm.
because it's like obvious. If you're an engineer and it's like, well, what are the variables for? And then you have to say, okay, well, we're trying to make predictions with them. And it's like, okay, well, okay, so are we just trying to see if they're there at all? Well, that's just a checkbox. That's not very interesting. But that, some people conclude that sometimes, I guess. But if you're trying to say, well, we're trying to see if they're related, you're by definition you're in a time series data set. You're tracking changes over time, and I just think that that's intuitive for an engineer to do that. As long as you're
Yeah.
saying that you're trying to see if they're correlated or related, um, and you're giving a history, because all intake must include a history, standard medical practice, not always done, but standard medical practice. And whenever you have a history and you're trying to see if the variables are related, you're in a timeline. So in this data model, the timeline is absolutely fundamental. And as far as I can tell, that hasn't existed before this. And then we can, go into how clinical assessment works, and that kind of the role of the timeline in that, and how well that's done today. But that's another rabbit hole.
But the timeline's so useful. I know uh, just seeing things clump together and recognizing that, oh, my anxiety was up and there was this thing going on in the relationship system, and oh, I had neck pain, and it makes more sense when you see it laid out like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have an example. I have two examples. One's small and one's big, but I can make them. I can make them both uh, short. I think the more complex one was a couple of interviews where the person, all I was doing was writing what they were saying and doing it in order, and then yeah, no, in order. And I was just doing like S and A because I didn't have this model. And it was like a 10-year timeline. It ended up being about 10 years. And what the person saw just looking at it was, oh, wow, I just picked up more and more and more and more
Mm.
responsibility and load. And then I just got more overwhelmed. That was the term. And just seeing like 8 times over the course of a few years during a critical period where they took on something that just completely blew off the top stress wise, and they didn't have to. They saw that just
Mm.
by laying it out. So you're getting scientific when you're doing that. That's the power of scientific practice is getting objective, is seeing things you hadn't seen before and in a more clear way that's undeniable, and a timeline just has an amazing utility that way.
Yeah. And it lets the person see in it draw their own inferences
Yeah,
and conclusions, you
which is
know?
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh, what what's next for your work with the app
Well,
that you're doing?
the thing that I'm working on that should have been done a while ago, but I've got other things I'm doing. Is
You mean you have a
get
job and a life?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Is to get that mobile app so I can hand that off to somebody like you or anyone on the street, and just have them start chatting with it and seeing the data that it throws down on a timeline,
Hmm.
um, and and a family diagram. So I'm just trying to get that to work well enough. It works pretty well right now in some ways. It's not quite ready to hand to somebody and then have them go, "Wow, this is wild." But it turns out that yeah, I'm learning a lot on the way. It turns out like if you want to automatically build a family diagram, it's technically very, very difficult. It's algorithmically very difficult.
Uh,
If you look at like Ancestry.com or Family Search or any of the other ones, they actually none of them have a way of doing that very well because it's an insanely difficult problem. And I'm talking when you've got romantic relationships or reproductive pair bonds in biology with like a male and a female like this, or whatever you want to call them, male, female, it doesn't matter. You've got people pairing up, and maybe there's multiple pairings with a person or whatever, and you draw up a U like that, and then you've got a line coming down with the offspring. Just doing that in a way that where you can fit like five nuclear families is really hard. Uh, and I mean, I'm good at this stuff, and it's taken a lot. So the ones that I have are kind of Frankensteiny, but you can use it, and it gets you faster to where it gets you to the point where you can quickly edit them.
mm,
That's one problem I'm still stuck on. Uh, I want to make it better, and then also just detecting those variables through the chat is hard, very hard. Detecting people is very easy, but detecting relationship shifts is harder. Detecting symptoms is easier. Detecting function shifts is the hardest. Um, and just getting that timeline to look right enough so that people relate and
yeah.
start looking at things in order. I just want to get that there so I can start handing the app to people because I just think it's really helped me see a few things just the way it is, even though I have the patience for it. Other people don't have
Yeah.
the patience for it. But I want to do that, and then I want to integrate that. The next level after that would be to get it so that that works inside the Pro app, which is much more complicated and actually has the full diagram and that the professional would use. That's the immediate goal.
Yeah.
I just want to do that. I want to get it in the App Store.
Well, I think
A lot
it's
goes
on
into
its
it.
way. That's for sure. Patrick, I was curious. What are you curious about in terms of talking to Ian Cousins? You said you got an upcoming
Oh man,
chat with him.
I had to figure this out. Yeah, because the scope of that talk, if it happens, he's agreed to it. But the scope of that talk is actually about where he's going to talk about his research and then offer up suggestions for building build synthetic software AI agents, which is fits Micron.
Hmm.
And that's pretty interesting to me professionally and engineering wise. But the I had to think about this for a while. The real question that I have that comes more from my psychology and Bowen theory background is what is the state of the research, or what does he think about the threat variable in collective behavior? Because I've
Mm,
been out of touch with that for a few years, full field, but I never really saw any inclusion of that kind of a variable into into collective behavior models, which is where I think the grounding of all the collective intelligence models. And I probably will have to explain what I mean by that, because the models I think that are the best known from his are when the fish are evading the penguin, something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
like the golden shiners, and the collective evasive behaviors that happens in the calculation of the path that happens in a very sophisticated way when you take all these dumb fish interacting together, and how that's adaptive because only a few of them get eaten. Um, that's all threat based, that's for sure. But as far as I can tell, all of his modeling and in his collegial network, or the people researching the same thing that I've found, have those fish following the same program regardless of level of threat.
Mm.
It's just like, oh, penguins coming and then they're moving, kind of like robots. But the thing that's interesting in people clinically is when the threat happens, you the model that you behave out of that determines your behavior is evolutionarily older and simpler. And so when you have a very complex problem and you act out of threat, you're acting more like a monkey or a cow type of a mammalian type of a thing that causes a lot of problems. And when you have what's the word, refractory or recalcitrant clinical issues that drive people to come in to see somebody like you or any other professional, often there's been a problem that's been there for a while, and the reactions, the threat driven reactions in that person and their immediate relationship system, and let's just say family more than anything, have kind of snowballed the original problem into something bigger it's much harder to see the original problem, right? And so that's the
Hmm.
layers of the onion and all that kind of stuff you got to pick apart. But that means that, so when you start going into the collective behavior modeling and stuff like that, that means that you've got to start modeling when threat occurs, that there's a lot more flail and error rate in the response that the organisms have, that they're making more mistakes and getting more chaotic. And then when they calm down,
Mm.
that changes. And that fluctuation is something that I never found, and I should go back and look, but I want to know how he thinks about that, because to me that is the most interesting variable and more interesting than the basic mechanics of like which direction they go. Even though
Yeah.
you would assume that they would choose worse directions, or the Apis mellifera, the western honeybee, would make poorer decisions when the scouts went out and looked for the new nest and had the collective intelligence thing happening with that. What happens when they're stressed? You know,
Mm.
uh, that's it. And then there's the triangle problem, but I want to know how if they ever think about that. But anyway, I think I could go on that, but maybe I can't. I don't know the answer to that.
That's really
How do
interesting.
you model it? I want to know how to model it. That's what I want to do. That's it. I just got a little clearer on that from you asking me.
You
So,
to add the threat response and stress and how stress impacts that into to be able to model that.
I want to model what the threat response does to behavior.
Mm.
Whenever you're modeling these kinds of things, you like when you do an agent model, and people do population models and stuff, and it's a 2D deal, or you're doing his 3D models with the fish. There's always some goal involved, because you're trying to measure how well it's doing what it's doing. Um, with the fish, it's like, how what direction are they going to evade the penguin, and then how does that cascade and get through the school of fish to make that collective decision.
Hmm.
It's that decision is what matters, or the honeybee choosing a new nest. It's the decision of which nest and if that's better or not under certain conditions. And what I want to know is, how do you include the variable and in the model for, we've got threat response going on, and that changes it makes the reaction better in that it's faster, but less sophisticated. And is that only a human thing? Maybe fish don't have that variation. I don't know. I
Yeah,
want to know how to
yeah, because you
model it. Yeah,
and so that's really interesting, and that's an interesting
I don't
question
know
too. Does
how.
it only happen in humans? I don't know.
It might. Yeah, it might. Because when we're really jacked up, as my nieces like to say, we're not thinking as much, and thinking is where we get all our sophisticated nuance. And so there's this big variation that we're a bull in a china shop more when we're have that threat response happening. So that's
Hmm.
a big change that I can describe. But when you're doing it in mechanical terms, it starts to look more like when you're modeling it more mechanically, it starts to look more like ants and fish because that's just kind of how well we can model things.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
You might have to wait till you get everybody in the family to use your app and to see what it looks like when you put it all together.
Yeah, the sampling. I actually think that wearables is the only way that's ever going to happen. You got to have
Yeah,
much more high resolution, moment to moment, stress response stuff, but also what people are saying, where they're looking,
yeah.
things like
Because you're
that.
right. It's so
Location.
it's so interesting in a family. It's one person can get stressed, have a threat response to something, real or imagined, and that kicks off everybody else's
Right.
threat response system. And that's the layers of the onion and then that depends on kind of their learning over time of how to respond to threat. Oh, it's
Yeah.
the layers
Yeah,
of
and,
the
and when
onion.
you throw the full Bowen Theory gamut at it, the family is a router where in technical terms, a router where there's like all this energy from threat in one place of it, and it has a way of channeling that energy to people differently depending on the configuration, and it's like a bunch of transistors in a computer. Sometimes this gate's
Mm.
open and it's not going from me to my wife who's not standing right here, but let's imagine she is and we're talking. It's
Right.
like I say something and it goes into her, but not you. And then somebody else shows up and because they're there, it goes from me to her to you. There's a routing. That's what Bowen theory is describing. That happens differently under different circumstances, and
Hmm.
there's a couple variables into that, and that is something that nobody has tracked very well. But it
Mm.
happens.
It definitely happens. Patrick, what is I could keep talking to you all day, but I know your wife's waiting in the offing out
I
there.
think so. I think she's off fishing, actually,
Okay,
now. So
okay.
anyway,
Well, I was curious, man. What's one way kind of something you've learned about yourself or a way you've grown in the last 10 years since I've known you that's you're like, oh, that's made such a difference for how I live my life.
for how I live my life,
Yeah.
10 years. Let's see, what was 10 years ago? It's 2026. Oh golly, that was the beginning of grad school.
Or
That's got to
after,
be it.
or 5 years.
There was a
I can
lot
make
of
it narrow.
learning going on in the
I
last 10 years.
the last 5 years, I'll make it narrower.
Okay, yeah, post grad. Oh, what have I learned? Personally, this is very like physiology, my own functioning kind of thing,
Hmm.
um, or kind of a scope. I've gotten better. I've learned more about what my own threat response looks like, and I mean physically, not outwardly physically, but what I can feel in my body.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of that came from being pretty devoted to Vipassana meditation for a while, where I actually could start to feel literally every part of my body inside and out.
Mm.
And that's from hours every day for years, and no drugs or alcohol because that takes away sensation, and lots of 10-day courses and things like that. So I got like a really high resolution feeling of things in my body, and that's gone down a bit because it's been harder to reintroduce or no, that was a monk like lifestyle that allowed that
Yeah.
focus and that dissertation and all that stuff to happen, and but I didn't have a life, and as I've come back into a more conventional lifestyle, and I wanted to get married and I wanted to be with all my friends in Alaska and my family and do things that are fun. um, it, it's a lot more of kind of, I guess you could call it kind of environmental flux that makes it harder to do that. And so I've lost the ability to feel as much as I had, but I can still feel quite a bit and inside and out, and and I can feel in the middle of my brain. I mean, physically, it's right in the center of this box. I can feel this. I think it's inflammation. That's why I said physiological. It
Hmm.
correlates with like having too much sugar,
Mm.
not getting well, having too much sugar or coffee or like alcohol if I do that, but also with threat. I'm finding the detail in this. It's in there, and when I can feel that kind of thing, um, that feels kind of like a burning, like when I'm really hot because I just had a bunch of cupcakes or whatever.
Mm.
You know, it feels kind of the same. And when I do that, my thinking is less sophisticated. When I can feel it, it's less sophisticated. I can't quite steer what I'm thinking about as much. I'm more preoccupied about things. I don't know, it
Hmm.
just feels like a rigidity or something. But I am able to detect when that's happening more. I'm working on feeling that more, and then I use that. My kind of working model is that that's my best indicator of A.
Mm.
I call
That
that threat.
anxiety's going up. Yeah.
Yeah, because inflammation, if that's what it is a big part of the threat response. I'm lowering what I think. I have a new concept for what my baseline level of anxiety is, and it's higher than I thought. I'm lowering my standard, or I think that my baseline level of anxiety is higher than I previously believed.
Mm.
And that's interesting. I get myself into things that I shouldn't sometimes, and I'm learning more about that. And it's because I have a little bit more of an alarm, so I'm really working to be able to feel that better.
Yeah.
So is that what you
That's great.
kind of something about what you asked?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really useful to be able to have that, tend to that nuance within yourself so that you know when something's happening, that you can,
I think it's critical.
yeah, you can regulate it better, or at least pay attention to it. No, at least not make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah, put off some decisions, or why
Yeah.
is this happening every day? Do I need to? I'll tell you an idea that helped a lot. And this goes into the A variable is I think that I think that when threat is happening, that there is an uncertainty component to it. It's that you've got to
Mm.
do something now and you don't know what to do. And so I guess you could call it a therapeutic move or something. When I can tell that I'm elevated, jacked up, agitated, anxious, whatever, um, I start looking for what is it that I'm unclear about, that I need to step back and organize and get more predictable, you know. And for me, recently, it's been stuff with work, and I mean, I'm working in AI. It's like chaotic, and job security, is this even going to be here? And then some family stuff, of course, that's huge. Um, when that is going on, there's all this uncertainty there. And so if I can organize it into something that's kind of boring, get it to where it's kind of boring, anxiety's gone.
Mm.
And I can't do that all the time quickly, but that is the task, I think. Because the opposite of anxiety, I believe, is apathy, and that's where you're bored and you're falling asleep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
helped a lot. That's an idea or like a therapeutic thing that's helped a lot. Is where's the uncertainty and how can I think through it and make it
Mm.
more boring? or more predictable or
Uh,
just simpler, you know.
I like that. Yeah. Focus on what you know, what you can do.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it takes a lot of thinking, and you have to just do the complicated thinking because it's a hard problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if back to the animal tracking animal behavior with stress, what if you injected something into the environment that created uncertainty and see what more uncertainty on different conditions, I guess, and maybe they react differently.
Yeah, I've played with that. It's hard. Then you've got to. That depends on. This is a technical topic, but that depends on. Okay, uncertain about what, which means you kind of already have to have like a way that they are thinking about things and the way they would operate without it. And then what does
Mm,
it look like when that's uncertain? You have to. The thing is, you basically have to write computer code for this stuff. Like it has to be that precise, or you can't have a model in the way that
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. But it's got. But I think that that's got to be a part of it. AI right now has none of this. Zero. It
Zero
cannot even.
uncertainty.
Right. It does not operate with this variable. Period.
Ah,
There's some, and this is the kind of thing that gets people into all the science fiction fears about AI. And fine, because it needs scrutiny and regulation, all that stuff, debate. But um, threat has got a self-preservation aspect to it, and
hmm,
a lot of that's wrapped up in Freud's ego idea. That was kind of part of what he was getting at with that, and it's it's got something in there where like the thing's got to start freaking out. That's another way to put threat or like be afraid, and that response has got to. That means it's going off the rails in a way,
mm,
in a manner of speaking. Even though that it's adaptive in one manner of speaking, in the other manner of speaking, it's losing its ability to do what it's usually doing.
hmm.
And right now, AI is strictly deterministic, actually. We call it probabilistic, meaning like you don't quite know what you're going to get and you can't quite believe it, and that is how you treat it. But under the hood, it's math, and
Mm,
I don't even really know how to simulate it with this incredible innovation that we have with large language models right now. It's like really it doesn't have that at all. It's just a robot. Um,
yeah.
so I don't know how to deal with
That's
this. That's why I want to ask Ian Cousin, like, how do you model this thing?
yeah.
Because then
You
then
know,
all of this computer stuff and all of this collective behavior stuff is something that I can interact with. Speaking of ego, I mean now it's in my problem domain, and then I can start thinking of new ideas on stuff to research and develop with that. But I don't know how to make the connection. So
Yeah. Well, I hope you get to talk to him, man.
yeah, me too.
You know.
Remind me how long we're going.
No, we're
Just because
getting.
I've got
I
a,
was just about to tell you to go fishing with your wife.
I couldn't remember. Okay, okay. But
All
anyway,
right.
take as long as
Thank.
you need. But I just wanted to know.
No, I think let's wrap it up and we'll chat again soon. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, all right. See you later. Bye.